Stop video, stop audio. Everyone, I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Symbiosis Law Pune, welcome you all to another attempt on behalf of Beyond Law CLC that during the period of lockdown, we could get ourselves enriched with knowledge with persons who are experts in their own field. And today, especially during the COVID-19, the arbitration is there and it has its own challenges. Therefore, we decided while we were deciding upon the panels, when we are all discussing about the topic within our team, as whom we should call. So the common consensus came out that, like I talked to Amit, it's more like a pyramid having more knowledge when Mr. Gaurav Banerjee gives his own insights and two persons, Shashank and Amit, pitching in the right tone so that the session goes in the right perspective. Mr. Gaurav Banerjee is a senior advocate in Supreme Court of India, whereas Mr. Shashank Garg is primarily practicing in Delhi High Court, and he's also an expert just like Mr. Gaurav Banerjee and Amit George. Mr. Banerjee is currently a private legal practitioner who has been a government legal officer both at the federal and provincial level. He appears as a counsel at domestic and international commercial arbitrations in India and overseas. It speaks volume of the fact that to make a mark within a state is a big thing. And a bigger thing is that once you make a mark pan-India, and once you make mark for the international, that shows the volume. As they say, it's 1D, 2D, and 3D. That shows the 3D perspective on the arbitration of Mr. Gaurav Banerjee. Then Mr. Shashank and Mr. George, they are both, we quite often see their articles on the live law and bar and bench. Plus, we also find that during this lockdown, we are more acting as a moderator, whereas all these three people are pitching in their views and giving us different dimensions, more specifically with the arbitration. And we are primarily at Chandigarh, therefore we thought that let's have the exposure of knowledge from their sides. Before we thought that we should have, in the present module, rather than wherein we were always asking the speaker to give the insights, then we used to have question answers. After a lot of deliberations, we thought we will have more of questions which we received during, on the emails and WhatsApp or with the discussions, which would be relevant with the today's topic. That is natural justice in arbitration proceedings, COVID-19 and the way forward. Since there are students also, young professionals also, I would request, before we take to the question and answers, which everybody can post on the chat, and those who want, they can get themselves unmuted for asking the questions from the three panelists who have immense knowledge, and we are quite sure that after this session, we will be all back thinking that we have actually gained something during the lockdown. We have unlocked our minds for a better perspective of arbitration. I will ask Dr. Amit George to give us the perspective difference between the domestic as well as the international arbitration. What is the broader view? Just a bird eye view, so that before we take the questions, at least the participants who are the students should have an idea what it is. Then I will ask Mr. Shashank to give in the insights as to how natural justice could be incorporated, because they say natural justice is everywhere where it is to be effective, because primarily two factors weigh. Nobody can be condemned unheard, and nobody should be judged in its own case. What are the ways the natural justice would affect in the arbitration, especially more during the COVID-19? What is the effect during the sessions being heard, conducted through virtual platforms? What is all? Over to you, Dr. Amit. And once again, we are enamored. Amongst us, we also have the our knowledge partners and the collaborator partners, that is Symbiosis Law Schools. Dr. Sudipta has joined with us. I will eventually introduce. Over to you, Dr. Amit.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Chatratji. I mean, to start this off, the exact nuances in terms of what constitutes an international commercial arbitration and a domestic arbitration, there are multiple permutations and combinations in terms of the controversies which get involved. But purely from the perspective of what we are discussing today, which is the natural justice context, I will in a very brief way try and define in a simplistic manner how exactly these two concepts are different and why that is relevant for our talk today. So, just as arbitration as a system or as a model is completely predicated on party autonomy, in the same way, the definition of what constitutes an international commercial arbitration is also therefore centered around the identity of the parties. So, if you take a look at Section 2, subsection 1, subsection F of the Arbitration Act, an international commercial arbitration is nothing but an arbitration which arises out of a commercial legal relationship and in which at least one of the parties is either a foreign national or a foreign resident or a foreign body corporate or let's say an entity whose central management and control is in foreign hands. So therefore, ultimately the determining factor, the major determining factor for what would constitute an international commercial arbitration is the foreign origin or foreign control of at least one of the parties. Now, it is necessary to understand that even if the particular arbitration falls within this definition but is actually seated in India, even then it will continue to remain an international commercial arbitration, even though then the part one would apply to such a scenario. Now, why this is relevant is because in the case of a purely domestic arbitration, and which by its very nature is an arbitration where both parties are Indian, there is no foreign element, is an arbitration which will be governed purely by Indian laws. But as it is in the case of an international commercial arbitration, because you have parties from different nationalities, different cultures, different legal systems involved, you may have a very varied range of laws that may apply to the arbitration, to the contract, to the arbitration clause specifically within the agreement, etc. So therefore, there is a larger possibility of a clash of, let's say, legal principles, of possibly a clash of the normative principles which we understand as a common law jurisdiction to be otherwise all pervading. Now, in a very similar context, if you want to distinguish between a foreign award and a domestic award, very simply put, a foreign award is an award which is delivered in an arbitration seated outside India. And I emphasize on the word seated, whereas a domestic award is the exact opposite. It is the result or germinates from an award which is seated inside India, within India. So therefore, this very basically fundamentally is the whatever description of this. Now, this is obviously sacrilege to someone like Mr. Banerjee, who is obviously aware of the complexities in this entire let's say way of dealing with what is a domestic arbitration and international commercial arbitration. But again, like I said, I have tried to keep it as simple as possible in the context of what exactly we are discussing today. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Amit. It couldn't have been explained in a more elucidated manner. It was short and crisp. And I would request Mr. Shashank, before we take the questions, just to give again, like what Mr. Amit said, that just a bird eye view on that natural justice, what could be the scope, etc., so that the participants also know that on what range they have to take the question, we will be taking the questions, etc., because the scope is very large, but still some bird eye view of this entire thing before we take the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chatur. I think in your introduction itself, you discuss about the two broad principles of natural justice. And the topic at hand is trying to find an interface of natural justice with arbitration. Given the circumstances now in COVID-19, how does the concept of natural justice in arbitration become so critical and important is what we intend to discuss. So very broadly speaking, I think the first part of the two principles of natural justice, that is the right to fair hearing, that is more relevant for today's discussion. That is something that is getting stalled, or there are impediments to it given the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now, to find the origin of natural justice in common law system, one can trace it back to some 16th century when the Chief Justice of King's Bench, Sir Matthew Hale, had come out with 80 tenets to dispense justice. the sixth tenet of that dealt with the first principle that we are dealing with. So I'll read out. He said that I shall not suffer myself to be possessed with any judgment at all till the whole business of both parties be heard. In short, it means that hearing of both the parties is an essential feature to proceed with any sort of dispute resolution system, whether it is arbitration, whether it is litigation, or any other form. Now, if we look at the Arbitration Act itself, just to give few examples, look at Section 18, that talks about equal treatment to parties. Then if we look at Section 24, Section 24 says, unless otherwise agreed by the parties, the arbitral tribunal shall decide whether to hold oral hearings for presentation of evidence or for oral arguments, or whether the proceedings shall be conducted on basis of documents and other materials. You see, Section 24 further with provisos, because obviously at that point of time when the legislature was drafting this, had not envisaged a situation like we have today, which is completely unprecedented, makes it almost mandatory to provide an oral hearing to a party who wants to go for an oral hearing. But as I said, that was during the circumstances in which oral hearing was feasible and possible. Now, a lot of things have happened. A lot of countries have taken various views in the last 2-3 months. Judgments have come in English courts, in other international courts. Maybe Indian Supreme Court also had a chance to look at how the situation is to be dealt with. But the impact of this is that if we look at Section 34, which is setting aside proceedings, or we look at Section 48, which is to resist an enforcement of an award, there are subsections which deal with this particular aspect, that if a party was not able to present its case, it is a ground sufficient to get an award set aside under 34, and the court will also or may refuse enforcement of a foreign award under Section 48 if a party is able to make out a case that it was unable to present its case properly. Now, we will have to see how this pandemic situation, how COVID-19 will play out with these principles.
Thank you, Mr. Shashank. As we said that today we will be taking the questions. And sir, Mr. Gaurav and Mr. Ahmed, just keep yourself unmuted, because then every time the unmuting will take time, and since we are the only there and somebody who wants to pose the question, we'll be unmuting them. Otherwise, so we are unmuting you. Principles of natural justice would be followed in the right way. Because once we have to hear you, we have to unmute you also. And same is with Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, since the questions would be coming on the chat box also, but the questions which we received, first question to Mr. Gaurav Banerjee. Is the concept of natural justice in arbitration proceedings distinct in any manner from the understanding in the concept of natural justice as prevalent before a court or other quasi-judicial forums?
So before I answer that question, Mr. Chatrat, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this. What is special about this session as opposed to all other webinars is that you have got this nice interactive question answer. Otherwise, everybody seems to have webinar fatigue. So I must compliment all of you for this fireside chat. This is a nice way of doing it. Thank you for inviting me. So let me come to your question. There's no easy answer to that question. What you are asking is there a different standard of natural justice in the courts, in sort of writ jurisdiction and in arbitration? Apparently, you may think yes, because arbitration is supposed to be more flexible. It is supposed to, you can cut some corners, you get a little bit of flexibility. But if you really look at the core of arbitration, if you really look at the act, and if you look at Section 18, which Shashank has mentioned, which is actually a copy, cut, paste of Article 18 of the model law. It is called the Magna Carta of arbitration procedure. And if you look at it, that is non-negotiable. And that basically has two facets. Shashank mentioned it. One is equal treatment of the parties, and second is full opportunity to present one's case. And essentially, if you look at 18, I would say that, really there is no difference in the core, because the core is still the same. Of course, there are, in the periphery, if there is no real breach of natural justice, courts may not interfere under section 34, etc. But the core article 18 is still the same. And very interestingly, since we are talking about national and international, and you have made all these comments about some international experience of mine, I'll pitch in and say that section 18, which you have in our act, which you must read. I request all the students and everybody just to read it again. Section 18 equivalent in England is section 33. And in the English Act, there are some sections which are mandatory, non-derogable. And one of the sections which is mandatory is 33. And if you see Justice Indu Malhotra's book on arbitration, which is a very well-written book, she also says that section 18 is mandatory. So to answer your question, yes, apparently the concept of natural justice may be slightly different in writ or in a suit, but effectively the core is the same. That's the situation.
Before I ask Shashank, since one question has come from Soumya Sahai on the chat box, so I thought before proceeding with that would relate back to Dr. Ahmed. It says, can you elaborate a little on the arbitration between foreign parties where sitting is in India? Ahmed?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, definitely. So essentially, I think this is again, we're going back to, I think, and one of the questions, I think Mr. Banerjee will like this. One of the questions is, sir, what is the difference between seat and venue? So
I think we'll have to have a separate,
exactly,
distinct, detailed seminar on seat, venue, whether
Absolutely.
two foreign parties can have an arbitration in India or not, whether two Indians can have an arbitration on abroad or not. We can go on about this definitely.
We can have these questions later on, but one point is, I'm happy that Kajal and Soumya has taken a point, and that you say that it requires another session. So before we proceed further, we will request that all three will give the insights on these issues, which can be a broader one. Meanwhile, since
I may only interject to say that those two questions, essentially they are one of the most contested issues at current in our arbitration regime. So excellent questions. But as Mr. Banerjee mentioned, the response to that will essentially span an independent webinar in itself.
Okay. Since Mr. Shashank had referred to section 18, I will ask, since there was a question on section 18 itself. Section 18 of the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act provides inter alia that each party shall be given an opportunity to present his case. What does present his case mean? Does it also cover virtual proceedings or hearings, or is it a right to physical hearing specifically, and we say it's under the Act in an exclusionary sense?
So could I respond to that? Section 18. In fact, you'll have to read section 18 read also with section 24. But I mean, to answer this, the question is whether you can really insist on a physical hearing, as opposed to a virtual hearing. So supposing you have a virtual hearing, does that fall foul of section 18/24, which says oral hearing? This question has arisen in a very different context. There was a case decided by Justice Varyava as far back as 2003 called State of Maharashtra and Praful Desai, which was a medical negligence criminal case. And one argument there which was made was that under section 273 of the CRPC, you have to record the evidence in the presence of the accused. So Bombay High Court said in the presence of the accused does not include video conference. But Supreme Court said no, in the presence of the accused does include a virtual hearing. So I think there should be really no problem in the language of 18 or in the language of 24 to preclude a virtual hearing. I really don't see a problem on that. And we have had cases in the past, though not in the arbitration context, where witness statements have also been taken on video, but we'll come to that. So according to me, there is really no problem, except to say that the 24 says you can insist on an oral hearing. So that is another aspect which we could explore perhaps later. But to me, there's no problem on 18 or 24 to have a virtual hearing. You don't need a physical hearing. The Arbitration Act is sufficiently flexible.
Just to supplement to what Sir said, I think the distinction that is to be drawn is between an oral hearing and a virtual hearing. If oral hearing is something that is mandated under Section 24, or to say so even in some of the institutional rules, we cannot say that giving an opportunity for oral hearing through a virtual mechanism would not mean that it is an oral hearing. So you can still do oral hearing by using any remote mechanism or a virtual video conferencing mechanism. What the Act says that if a party requires oral hearing, it should be given. That does not really mean that it should be in the physical presence of the parties. And given the circumstances today, I think we all would agree that that requirement has to be done away with. Now, the questions are with respect to what are the circumstances and situations which could preclude a party from presenting its case. Can somebody say that I do not have sufficient tech know-how, or even if I have, I do not have access to machines, I do not have access to files at the moment? What would happen in those cases? You see, if we look at the tech savviness of our arbitration ecosystem, not just in India, and India would be worse. I'm quoting the 2018 study of Queen Mary, which said that 78% of the people who responded to that survey were not tech savvy and had never used any technology with respect to arbitration. These are international arbitrators we are talking about. So if we look at the Indian context, we could assume that it could be at least 88%, if not more. So I think the real question in today's situation is that what happens when somebody is even not able to come for a hearing on a virtual mechanism. If it is VC, whether it is any of the modes that we are using, Zoom, WebEx, what happens when a party says it cannot proceed because it does not have the requisite technical know-how or technical capability? I think those are the situations which we will have to answer as and when we proceed during this pandemic. But from my understanding, nothing in the Act would come to help a party who is deliberately trying to, stall these proceedings in the garb of not having the technical know-how or not being able to present it itself on virtual platforms. That is my view, subject to what Mr. Banerjee or Dr. George has to say.
Taking further, I will ask Dr. Ahmed, Section 18 of the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act, since we have discussed a lot about that, inter alia states that each party shall be given a full opportunity, while Section 33 of the English Arbitration Act states giving each party a reasonable opportunity. Can it therefore be inferred that the threshold for compliance with the principle of natural justice is higher under the Indian Arbitration Act? Because the subtle difference is written as full opportunity and a reasonable opportunity.
Right. Well, I think the background to this different phraseology which has been employed can possibly be traced back to how, as a legal system, we function. There's this very famous saying by Mr. Fali Nariman that the problem with the Indian legal system is not a lack of due process, but too much due process. So I think that is something which sort of percolates into the drafting of the statute also, in the sense that we've used the term full opportunity. But now coming to the issue of whether the use of the term full opportunity essentially represents some sort of a license or some sort of an absolutely objective criteria of ensuring that there is absolutely no discretion available to the tribunal to modulate what natural justice is in the appropriate circumstances would not be correct, because there are many judgments which have been passed in situations where the party has complained about the fact that it was not given the kind of opportunity which it subjectively thought was necessary for it to put forth the case. So there are various judgments. There is a very recent judgment of the Delhi High Court of Justice Pratik Galan. I believe this is in the case of
Sukhbir Singh.
Yeah, Sukhbir Singh, absolutely. So thank you, sir. So in Sukhbir Singh, Justice Jalan has, I would say, very comprehensively set out the basic principles which would underline 18 Red 24. And he has said that even though oral hearing, etc., is obviously a mandatory requirement, this does not mean that the tribunal consents to absolutely unending, oral arguments or unending cross-examination, etc. So even though the term full opportunity is used in the Indian context, ultimately in terms of judicial precedent and also the practical side of it, we would read it as reasonable opportunity. Because the minute you say full, then you enter into a slightly subjective domain, because a party which essentially is recalcitrant, which does not want the proceedings to continue, might insist on, like a very, very lengthy sort of procedure to be implemented, which would not really be in the interest of justice or in the interest of efficacy, which is ultimately the overall, guiding principle for an arbitral tribunal. So therefore, even though the phraseology employed is slightly different in both acts, I think in the Indian scenario also, the interpretation especially is on a more practical level, only calling for an insurance of the core, like Mr. Banerjee pointed out, the core of natural justice not being violated. But I don't think otherwise there is a massive difference in terms of the normative underpinnings of the usage of full opportunity or reasonable opportunity between the Indian Arbitration Act and the English arbitration. Subject to what Banerjee sir had.
I'd like to add something. I agree with what Amit has said, but I just want to add something just by way of anecdote and history. So the question you asked is, our act says full opportunity, English act says reasonable opportunity, but why did this happen? I mean, that's an interesting historic perspective I just wanted to mention. Our use of the word full opportunity actually comes from the ancestral model law and the New York Convention. We have just copied Article 18. What happened in England was, when they wanted to bring in their new law in 1996, they had a committee called the Departmental Advisory Committee, headed by Lord Mustill, who was a very big name in arbitration. Mustill and Boyd is a very well-known person. And they changed the language from full to reasonable. And the reason they changed it, and I'll just read out that reason, is, we prefer the word reasonable because it removes any suggestion that a party is entitled to take as long as he likes, however objectively unreasonable that might be. So they replaced the word full with the word reasonable, because they thought the word full means you can go on and on and on. Full opportunity means unending opportunity. But our law, as Dr. Amit has pointed out and Justice Jalan has pointed out, that full opportunity also really means the same thing. It does not mean you can go on unendingly, like I'm going on unendingly on the same question. You can't go on unendingly. And very interestingly, this distinction between full and reasonable opportunity, there is a Bombay High Court judgment called Pradyuman Kumar Sharma. If you have the time, you look it up. You can look it up, versus Jayasagar Sancheti, where one of the lawyers, clever lawyers like one of us, tried this stunt saying full is different, reasonable is different. But Justice Dhanuka, R.D. Dhanuka, not his late father, Justice Dhanuka said, really there is no difference. If you read 18, 19 and 24 with the proviso introduced by the Law Commission. So in roundabout terms, there is a change in the language. In short terms, as Dr. George says, the effect is exactly the same. There is really no difference.
Shashank, do you want to pitch in something?
I think the question has been answered sufficiently by both.
Now, Professor Sudipta, she's from Symbiosis Law School, Pune. She wants to ask the question directly to Mr. Gaurav Banerjee. We have unmuted Professor Sudipta.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chaitra. Dr. Banerjee, Mr. Banerjee, sir, we have spoken about, the same topic, and you almost answered what I had to say. But basically, I have one more question. I was, seeing a very interesting article which was talking about due process paranoia, in fact, in international arbitration, where there was this Singapore appeals proceedings, the Singapore Court of Appeals, where they pulled up an arbitration process to say that, cost and time efficiency is the distinguishing feature of any international arbitration. That is why people opt for it in the first place. So when you go about determining what is due process and how much of due process is enough due process to really meet the requirements of Article 18 of the model law, they clearly, crystalled it down to saying that it has to be limited by considerations of reasonableness and fairness, exactly what you were talking about. So what is your experience in India? Have we seen this kind of, process abuse happening in Indian arbitration scenario? And has there been court proceedings where they have pulled up these kind of proceedings to say that this is perhaps not the way to go about it and not what was intended by the law?
That's a very interesting question. Let me answer it in this way. You see, you look at it from the point of view of a lawyer first. I'm coming to the arbitrator second. The lawyer who has lost the arbitration is now going to challenge it. The public policy defense, which is now there after SsangYong, etc., has become very narrow. So now we are seeing practically in the last 3, 4, 5 years, that the natural justice defense is being pushed in as a ground to set aside an award. Basically 34, 1, 2, 1, whatever it is, B. The same 5(1)(b) of the New York Convention. Now lawyers are discovering, oh, this is a great way of challenging awards. And the reality is that you somehow try and fit the merits in and say that the judge considered, the arbitral tribunal considered a point which was never argued, the SsangYong theory. So what now the backlash is with the foreign arbitrators, it was already there. Now domestic arbitrators, I also sit as an arbitrator. The problem is if you do not give the parties a long rope, you leave your award liable to challenge. So even if somebody asks you for an adjournment at the last moment, or he says, I have not got a chance, give me a sir rejoinder, the arbitrator, unlike a judge who has the power of the court behind him, somehow does suffer that pressure. And therefore there is, as you correctly said, a due process paranoia. Sometimes it is good that the Singapore, I think it was the High Court or the Court of Appeal, came down very harshly on this. But the reality is, as long as lawyers are there, they will try it. And therefore arbitrators are now excessively careful, and sadly excessively careful at the cost of prolonging the matter or increasing the cost. It is very difficult to take a decision to completely shut out somebody, but you may have to, say, supposing somebody right at the end puts in a witness statement, or right at the end pushes in a document, you have to shut them out. But I think our domestic arbitrators are much more relaxed and much more lax, and they should be a little more firm about it, particularly in view of 29A and the fact that you have to finish arbitration in 1.5 years. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much, sir.
Just to supplement what sir said, I think on a lighter note, what we see, our arbitrators are very, very liberal. And even if they say in a procedural order that this is the last opportunity, it really doesn't mean that it is the last opportunity. I've had arbitrations in which the last opportunity has been written in at least 3 or 4 procedural order consecutively. So by imposing a cost of 10,000, 15,000, which are peanuts, I think parties are able to get their way. And whoever wants to drag these proceedings are being able to do so, because as Mr. Banerjee said, the consequences are not as severe as they should be.
Shashank, once we are talking of it, is it feasible to have virtual witness examination? What extra safeguards should an arbitral tribunal adopt during virtual witness examination so as to avoid any due concerns subsequently?
So I think this is a concern that all of us have had. In fact, this was my concern some time ago, and I was consulting with peers, including Dr. George, that what should be the way. Because you see, the first and foremost requirement during a cross-examination is that the arbitrator must see the conduct of the witness, should be able to see from the answers the witness is giving whether those are honest answers. And one also has to ensure that he's not being tutored while he's answering these questions. So all of this becomes slightly difficult when we talk about virtual hearings scenario. But moving forward, I think this has become a norm. The new normal is that we will have to use virtual hearing platforms to go ahead, and one party can drag it as much as they want. But if one really has to go, one really has to proceed with the arbitration, even the arbitrators and the councils are realizing the only way would be through virtual hearings. So the simplest way that we have adopted in some of the hearings where I did cross was to put two devices in the room where the witness is testifying. One would obviously focus on the witness, the other would focus on the entire room, so that one can ensure that there is no third person who's present in the room. There is nothing else that the witness has other than the documents that are required for the case. However, having said so, this is not really a foolproof method, because even when right now I'm looking at my computer screen, there could be 4 windows open. You would not be able to really make out if I'm continuously looking at the Zoom window, or there are other chat windows which are open on left or right where somebody is helping me with the answer. So as I said, there is no foolproof mechanism just now, but some of these basic safeguards, precautions may help to proceed with the cross-examination. I don't know if Mr. Banerjee and Dr. George had a different experience or a better experience, but this is what I have seen in the recent past.
See, practically, in one matter, Justice Ravindran observed that cross-examination, of course, is not great on VC, but cross-examination in a commercial matter with large numbers of documents, how much relevance it has is also one aspect to be seen. Having said that, yes, of course, I mean, there are fundamental problems, and many people have suggested many safeguards, Shashank safeguard. I think one way is if the witness shares his screen, then that problem of him being tutored may not be there. Or what we have had in some cases, some neutral person standing with him and papers being couriered. So some hybrid system for which it works. But obviously it's not a great scenario. I think more than the issue of demeanor, everybody says witness demeanor, but reality is the main problem is you cannot actually carry on a conversation, and there is a gap. So there is a problem cross-examining. I mean, practically it's not that easy. Other side interrupts, it becomes a little difficult, but it's happening. I mean, SIAC has done a few, people have done a few. It's problematic, but one has to adjust to it. My issue is much more the other issue, which is what happens if it is sort of technologically not working, if the feed goes, if the all sorts of those problems seem to be much more problematic than the actual cross. Practically, I mean, that's where the problem is much more than this. Judges can't handle it, parties can't handle it. Practical problems as opposed to the legal issue.
Right, and so just to add to what Sir just said, so actually anecdotally, this is something which I have faced in the past, where there was one witness who was in a foreign country and had a last minute difficulty in traveling to India. And therefore, we had to do one session through video conference. This is much before COVID. And ultimately, when one of the more tougher questions went to the witness, suddenly the screen went blank. And the witness came back after half an hour, and then he vomited a 3-page long answer. So that's the difficulty. Now, how do you can't, unless he or she makes a habit out of it, you can't really pin the person down. So as Sir rightly said, this is one of the major problems. Now, as a practitioner, the other problem which we will have obviously is that cross-examination is the most instinctive part of, the entire legal process. You can prepare for legal submissions, you can prepare for arguments, but cross is so instinctive and on the spot. So therefore, like Banerjee sir said, in terms of being able to have a conversation with the witness, in order to be able to gauge the body language, etc., it creates strategic problems for lawyers. But yeah, like he correctly said, the greater problem institutionally or systematically is how to ensure the integrity of the process and the fact that the witness is not able to get out of a tight spot.
So Dipta, you can ask. You had asked for the unmuting. So Dipta, you can.
Yeah, I have one question here, Dr. George, for you and also Mr. Banerjee sir and Shashank sir. You were talking about cross-examination and the process involved, especially when we are going remote.
Right.
Now, if as a party I have an objection to the whole process, and be it whether I am objecting to the whole to the process itself per se, that it doesn't give me a full hearing opportunity, or there could be technical glitches, etc. Now we know there will be technical glitches. There it's a very foreseeable situation, and we also know we are in the middle of a pandemic. Now, as a party, if I do not consent to it, shouldn't I raise my objection right at the beginning of the proceedings, than reserving my right for the end of the proceedings, especially in a scenario where I have lost? So doesn't that conduct completely take away my right to say that there has been a breach of natural justice or due process in an arbitration proceeding?
Yeah, that would significantly cripple your ability to be able to articulate this point at an award challenge stage, for the simple reason that the arbitrators have the necessary discretion to modulate procedure, unless of course there is an agreement to the contrary between the parties. Now, because of the outbreak of COVID, as Shashank also mentioned, unfortunately or fortunately, this seems to be the new normal in arbitration proceedings as also in court proceedings. Therefore, considering this is the new normal and it is a matter of necessity, unless a party raises an objection, and an objection which it can sustain at the very initial stage, it may be too late in the day, a year later or a year and a half later at a section 34 stage to say, oh, I never got the opportunity which I wanted. But as Mr. Banerjee pointed out, if such an objection is raised by a party, then an arbitral tribunal would be well advised to consider it with all seriousness, because unless you can ensure that at least textually or ex facie the procedure followed by you was fair, then an objection like this will always be like a Damocles sword hanging over the validity of the award.
So
Thank you.
can I chip in, Professor Sudipta? Let me answer your question with a concrete example. And
I was hoping, sir. I was hoping you would share an anecdote.
No, it's not. It's in fact a reported judgment. It's an amazing judgment. Please go and have a look at it. Since you're an academic, so have a look at it. It was a case. It was an Australian case of 2016 called Sino Dragon versus Noble Resources.
Okay.
It's a 2016. You can Google it and find it.
Yeah.
Everything that could go wrong went wrong. So first, the Chinese witness, Mr. Lee, he could not come on the thing. He came on Skype. Then his voice could not be heard. So voice was going separate. His picture was going separate. Then he could not find his documents on the virtual conference. Then his interpreter had to be sacked because the interpreter was completely dodgy. Then there was somebody unknown in the room. So it was a complete shambles, and Sino then lost the case because anyway the connection was very bad, and Sino lost the case, and Sino then said, look, my right has been affected under article, same thing as section 18, and in spite of all these factors, which normally supposing would have shown that there was some imbalance and you were not given a full opportunity, the Australian court said, nothing doing, you have lost the case, you should have raised it at the appropriate time. But it's a fabulous case on the facts. You must read it just for the entertainment value.
I will. Thank you so much, sir.
Just to add to what Sarah said, there is in fact a 2009 judgment of US Supreme Court, which is China Bank versus BLK Industries. Something similar had happened. These were the proceedings of enforcement where they were trying to resist enforcement, saying that they could not get, the witness could not get an opportunity to present itself. So the Supreme Court of US had held that given the medical history of the witness, the tribunal had provided it ample opportunity to depose on a virtual platform. But the witness and the counsel insisted that the testimony should only be physical presence and cannot be done remotely. So the court had held that because you were given enough and reasonable opportunities to present your case, the witness could have done it through a virtual platform and chose not to. Now it is not open for you to say that you were unable to present your best case. So even before the pandemic had happened, as Sir gave an example of 2016, and I am citing one from 2009, these things happen very often.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this question is by Akshat Trivedi. Any of you could answer or anybody could thereafter supplement. Respected speakers, my question is with regard to the newly included section 42A in the Arbitration Act. What are the speakers' view about data privacy and confidentiality in virtual hearing platforms like WebEx, Zoom, etc., in the light of the absolute confidentiality imposed on all institutional arbitrations? On institutional arbitration, both international and domestic arbitration.
You know, frankly, I must, I mean, it's a great question because frankly, 42A is very badly drafted. It'll have to be read down with some exceptions. You can never have absolute confidentiality because you will have to reveal the facts if you have to go before a court, etc. So 42A will have to be read down. We had this discussion with the Law Commission. We had this discussion with the government, but anyway, that's a long story and there's no answer to it. But I think, yes, it's a major concern because confidentiality is vital. We have now brought it in the statute. The way that institutions are getting around this is essentially you enter into agreements that this technology will be used and you therefore protect on confidentiality. But obviously virtual platforms are not foolproof, and you know, you will have to take it a case at a time. And Supreme Court is using video, but High Court is using WebEx, Delhi High Court is using WebEx, other people are using Team. So we'll have to live with the fact that some of these, you know, some of these issues will come, and all the parties involved will have to waive or sign some of these confidentiality agreements. I can't see any other way of getting around it. But the questioners, Akshay Chaudhary is absolutely right. There is a problem with 42, but that's not only on virtual. That's also a general problem. I mean, 42 is very, very stiff.
Restricted to theory. In fact, if Mr. Banerjee would recall, during the ECAR 2018 Sydney, I think there was a discussion on that, and most of the arbitration practitioners would agree, once an award is pronounced, the winning side would leak it to the press. And GAR would, in international scenario, GAR would cover each and every award which is supposed to be confidential. And
Absolutely.
in a domestic scenario, bar and bench or somebody else would be covering a domestic award which is supposed to be confidential. So I think it's really a matter of theory. So till the time we realize that this confidentiality aspect has to be looked into with a practical view, and not really what was being taught in the law school, that arbitrations were one of the basic features is confidentiality.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, just to add to that, I think one serious challenge which we will now face is it's not just going to be the award, because now when we move to these online platforms, essentially there is going to be always a possibility that the entire proceeding is video recorded, or if not the video, at least the audio. Now in foreign jurisdictions, this is not a big deal because many of the international commercial arbitrations, you have a live transcription which goes on, if not a video recording. But in the Indian context, this is something which will be very new for people. You essentially have the entire, let's say the hearing being recorded. So therefore, in the context of 42A, that will create obviously an entirely new realm of problems.
So I had this problem with one retired judge who's an arbitrator. He said, are we being recorded? So then we had that discussion as to whether you want it to be recorded, don't want it to be recorded, who will keep the record, how will it be confidential, how the hearing went only on that. So we'll have to see where it goes.
I don't know, sir, if you had the occasion of looking at what DISC has recently
that circular that has come out just now.
So the guidelines or the circular says that you have to now send a clip, a 15-minute or a 20-minute clip of your arguments.
Right.
So if there is a 34 arising out of an award like that, I'm sure the court would require all those clips also. So there is enough recording that is likely to happen as we go forward.
Akshay has given the T49. Actually, those persons who want their questions to be read out, I would rather suggest that there shouldn't be any confidentiality. They can come out with their names as such. Now, reading out T49 shows on a different pedestal that actually, once we are talking of confidentiality, the participants want to maintain the confidentiality. The question is, please note that in our project, client had to treat the lockdown under force majeure clause and denied the idle claim as per the Act of God. Please advise us how to process the arbitration claim in this manner.
Okay, I hope this is meant for this webinar, the question, because this seems to be on the construction claim. So again, I think this will not require one webinar. It will probably require 20 webinars to answer. But the only issue is, this essentially goes into elements of damages under the law. And obviously, in terms of force majeure conditions, you will have to essentially look at your contract to be able to determine if at all, a claim for damages will lie. So I think it entirely depends on the force majeure clause and its wording under the contract. So of course, there is now, I think there are at least, 1,000 webinars on this in terms of a general context. So I think that would be at least how I would see it.
Mr. Banerjee or Shashank?
I don't think there's much to add there. It is really fact specific regarding that particular case. We'll have to look at the facts and we'll have to look at the contract.
Like what Amit said, that we will have to have a specific webinar on that. We are in fact having with Anirudh Krishnan and Rohit Singhal on construction contracts, typical issues in the.
I think you should refer that question to Anirudh or Massing.
No, I have specifically pinpointed only for that reason that the participants who actually want to go, as they say that it's the sequel will be in a coming and what he wants that question to be answered, so he has to participate in that. Because in serials also they say that abhi tak or kal tak.
Right, absolutely.
It says this would be for Mr. Banerjee, which the question which we received. Since arbitration is based on party autonomy, to what extent can parties contractually exclude or modulate the standards of natural justice? In such cases, should the courts in award challenge proceedings apply this modified standards while examining natural justice compliance?
I have a real difficulty with this.
Mr. Banerjee?
Yeah. I have a real difficulty. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can, sir.
Yeah, you're audible.
So, I actually don't, there are certain minimum standards of natural justice that you just cannot contract out of. I mean, Article 18 standards you cannot contract out of, and just completely by way of, side comment, if you, all of you would have seen that judgment of NAFED and Alimenta, which is being criticized now quite a lot in the academic world. But one peculiar, there are a lot of judgments on natural justice. Now there is that Vijay Karya Prismian, Centro Trade, but NAFED Alimenta also had one peculiar thing, just by way of example to answer your question, where there was a two-stage arbitration. So there was one arbitration before something called FOSFA, and then there was an appeal to an appellate board. So the peculiar thing that happened there was that the arbitrator who was appointed by Alimenta then appeared as the lawyer in the appeal. So one hat he wore as arbitrator, one hat he wore as lawyer. So, I mean, this is completely contrary to the principle of natural justice, that you cannot be a judge in your own cause. But interestingly, I asked some people in England, they say that this was the norm in the 80s and 90s. I would say that regardless of it being the norm, you cannot contract out of, basic principles like no man should be a judge on his own cause, you cannot be condemned unheard. So to answer your question, the core principles cannot be contracted out of. Otherwise, there is always some flexibility as to, whether any prejudice has been caused by some alleged breach of natural justice.
I will ask Sushant, because this question, I'm just taking cue from what he observed. If an arbitral tribunal wishes to impose limitations on the length of oral arguments and oral evidence, since the same will be conducted on a virtual platform, how should it be done in the light of the parties to fully present their case? It is in context with what you said, that the giving of the video clips, etc. How do you put it forward?
Okay, so I think if we look at the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, Section 24 in particular, which deals with hearing and written proceedings, the language of the section, it starts with unless otherwise agreed by the parties, the arbitral tribunal shall decide whether to hold oral hearings and the presentation of evidence or for oral arguments, or whether the proceeding shall be conducted on basis of documents and other materials. So until and unless there is anything to the contrary decided by the parties, the tribunal has the final say on the procedure that it wants to adopt. Now, time frame is part and parcel of that procedure. And as Dr. George and Mr. Banerjee discussed about the recent judgment of Delhi High Court of Justice Jalan, I think one must appreciate in the current scenario, we are adopting principles that have been used in international arbitration in and out. These time frame arguments is something that happens in all international arbitration. In domestic arbitration, we were just not used to it. Now, given the current situation, I think, and even if you take the example of what Delhi International Arbitration Center circular talks about, where there is a time frame for the clip. Again, that is flexible. That is only a suggestion, whereas the same circular would also allow parties and the arbitrator to decide if it requires a longer duration of that clip. But long and short of it is that if the parties have not decided anything to the contrary, the tribunal will have the final say in deciding the procedure. And if it feels that 1 hour is sufficient for one party and 1 hour to the other party, till the time it is following Section 18 requirements that equal opportunities being given, then there would be very less chance of any party making a case of bias or of not being able to present its case to the fullest. However, one party may argue that the complexity from one side was far more, the witnesses were many more than the other side, and therefore the tribunal will have to take a objective view of all of this.
I can ask Amit, what is your take? How does one draw a balance where an arbitral award on one hand is rendered in the international commercial arbitration, which presumably uses supranational body or rules, whereas on the other hand, national courts apply the principle of natural justice, ordinarily followed by it in award challenge proceedings?
Yeah, so see, this is obviously going to be an issue when it comes to looking at a foreign award, because essentially when you look at the public policy definition, even though it is very narrow, it is intrinsically centered around and takes influence from our local laws or our local legal culture. So as Mr. Banerjee pointed out, there may be many, let's say, practices or ways of advocacy or ways of adjudication, which may seem very alien to us in our local legal and cultural context. So any court which essentially looks at an award obviously has to be alive to the importance of difference. Like when we talk about cultures or we talk about nation states, we say we must always be alive and respect that element of difference. Now, for instance, if in an international commercial arbitration, it is an international commercial arbitration primarily structured around, let's say, the civil law system, then obviously the procedure or the ultimate result, which is, let's say, contained in a foreign award, might sound strange to us or seem strange to us when we view it from a local prism. But as Mr. Banerjee pointed out, there obviously has to be some sort of a understanding of what constitutes minimal, non-derogable standards internationally. And therefore, when we look at the public policy regime, already it is extremely restricted when it comes to the Part 2 application. So therefore, naturally, there is going to be some tension when we apply, let's say, the public policy exception, which is carved out in our local context, to a foreign award, which may be a semblance or a mixture of various legal cultures and legal approaches. But the way of going about it is that as long as that particular award does not represent a procedure which is fundamentally abhorrent or which is completely obliterative of all notions of fair play and equal opportunity, then I don't think it is something which should be interfered with lightly. So, I mean, that's my take on the issue.
This is a common question, so anybody can ask, answer it, not ask. Kajal Chand, how natural justice will play a role in case of a legal misconduct by an arbitrator?
So earlier, the concept of legal misconduct was there under the 1940 Act. One of the aspects of legal misconduct was obviously, violating the principles of natural justice. Legal misconduct does not mean actual misconduct or bias. And essentially, it's a warning to arbitrators. And I think you'll be surprised to see how many people mess it up, that you have to actually give equal opportunity to both the parties, and you have to give both parties enough opportunity. You have to make sure that you don't discuss the matter with one party, ex party. Every communication has to be referred to the other party. Every opportunity has to be given. And ultimately, you have to take a balanced view. I think the problem here is not so much the concept of legal misconduct, as mentioned by the questioner, but the lack of training of some of our arbitrators who may not, be that familiar with the process.
This is for Mr. Banerjee, specifically the question had come. Since arbitration is based on party autonomy, to what extent can parties contractually exclude or modulate the standards of natural justice? No, we have done that. To what extent can international consistency be ensured in the validity or enforcement of an arbitral award, considering that different jurisdictions have different natural justice standards? The New York Convention represents a high degree of certainty that an arbitral award will be recognized and enforced almost anywhere. Do domestic interpretations to natural justice undermine such enforceability or not?
So in practical terms, I mean, it's theoretically, yes, there may be a problem that our standard of natural justice is different from, let us say, some other countries, and there should be certainty. But what is actually practically there, I think Mr. Nariman, Fali Nariman has made an analysis, and we've also looked at all the cases that one could come across over the last 10 years. Particularly with regard to natural justice, because that was considered in Centro Trade, where I appeared, in Vijay Karya, in Glencore. The practical reality is only one award, that is NAFED, has not been enforced. Otherwise, generally, every award has been enforced by all the high courts, whether it is Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta. So practically, this natural justice defense has really not worked. So in real terms, it has not made a difference on the ground. But yes, theoretically, we should make sure that our natural justice parameters are in sync with foreign law. But in any case, all these judgments, if you see Glencore, if you see Prysmian, if you see Centro Trade, the judges have followed various foreign precedents from US, from Singapore, even from I cited a case from China. They have made sure to do it. So I don't think it's really practically a problem now.
Shashank, this is a question since you have been dealing into this virtual platform, etc. Assuming that the parties to an arbitration agree not to hold a virtual hearing, could the arbitral tribunal still go ahead and hold a virtual hearing?
See, as we know, the entire arbitration is based on party autonomy. If the parties decide that they do not want virtual hearing, both the parties, then I don't think a tribunal can force its will and proceed. It can simply put the matter in abeyance, it could adjourn it sine die, but I don't think a tribunal would have the liberty to force its will if both parties do not want virtual hearing. I don't think there will be any precedent of this sort where parties have informed the tribunal that they do not wish to hold a virtual hearing, or even for that matter, anything. Even if the parties decide that they do not want to put evidence in a matter, they do not want witnesses to testify, I think tribunal will not have the liberty to go beyond the will of the parties.
As in, I would just say what we in Hindi say, Miyan Bibi nahi razi to kya karega Qazi? In the same way.
Yeah, and I just to add to what Shashank said, that so I think the only precedent we have on the tribunal not following what the parties have said is in the matter of determination of fees. But that also has been nipped in the bud, I think, by Justice Nariman's judgment, where he said that also, you can't get out of. So yeah, just to on the lighter note, just to add to what Shashank said.
Amit, for you, do you think that the breaches of principles of natural justice often go uncorrected by courts on commercial centers of the world for not being wanted to be seen as hostile to arbitrations by engaging in intrusive scrutiny of the arbitral award?
Well, I think in most jurisdictions, the way the arbitration law has developed, there is definitely a pro-enforcement bias. And for instance, those really stark facts in the case Mr. Banerjee pointed out, in terms of almost everything possible going wrong during the hearings. But ultimately, the court decided to go the enforcement route for the simple reason that, it was the bargain between the parties, and the party which sought to contend that it was affected did not raise the objection at the relevant time. So if you ask me normatively, yes, there is a pro-enforcement bias. But as Mr. Banerjee also pointed out, maybe in the last few years, the very few cases where foreign awards have been refused enforcement, a vast majority of them have pertained to violation of natural justice. Because even Justice Naveen Chawla in the Delhi High Court, that's one of the very rare cases in the last decade where the Delhi High Court has refused enforcement of a foreign award. And in that case, it was refused almost entirely on the ground that there was a violation of natural justice and equal opportunity was not granted to one of the parties. So even though there is a pro-enforcement bias, I would say that natural justice is one of the few elements which courts have still consistently applied to refuse enforcement. So I think that is at least one arena where the pro-enforcement bias has, in many cases, been whittled down.
Just to add, the case that Dr. Amit was referring to is that Campos Brothers and Matri Bhumi. It's a very interesting case. It was also referred to in Vijay Karya. It was shocking to read the facts there. But I am told it's pending before the division bench. I don't know what has happened there.
This is by Akshay Chaudhary. What is the remedy if the extension application under section 29A is not allowed?
If the 29A application is not allowed, then the arbitration essentially falls. So then I think the clock goes back to zero and you have to start afresh with a fresh invocation. I can't see any other way of doing it. In fact, there's that Madras High Court judgment, and now I think there's a Supreme Court judgment, though this is nothing really to do with natural justice, but there's that Madras High Court judgment and Supreme Court judgment which says that if the arbitrator goes beyond the period agreed for the extension, then that he is without jurisdiction. But I think this is very harsh, because then you have lost out. Why should a 29A be refused is in itself unusual circumstances. Must be something very unusual for a 29A application to be refused. I have not come across any such refusal. I don't know whether Amit or Shashank has come across a refusal of extension by the High Court in any matter.
So I have come across threatened refusals during the hearing, but the judge has ultimately relented. So like you said, nothing's really fructified into a final refusal.
I think the question is a little bit futuristic. The questioner is envisaging a situation given the pandemic. What happens if the arbitrators are not able to conduct hearings for reasons of not being tech savvy? Will that be a ground sufficient for court to refuse an extension under 29A? I don't know if that is the intent of the question. and we'll have to see when that happens. But I think we are a very liberal system, sir. I think even Delhi and Bombay High Court, who are considered best in commercial justice dispensation, are extremely liberal when it comes to issues like this.
I can just add this, both of you will not remember it because it was probably before your time. Under the 1940 Act, there was a 4-month limit, and there were any number of applications for extension. I remember in Calcutta High Court, which were just given, the judge didn't even ask. You filed the petition, it was ordered. So these extensions are given almost for the asking, usually.
So this is a question to you, Mr. Banerjee. Is there a conflation of natural justice and public policy? Would every breach of natural justice be considered contrary to public policy or not?
Okay, so this is very, very interesting question, because if you actually look at now, I mean, let me answer it in a slightly theoretical way. So, is every breach of natural justice going to trigger the public policy defense or not? So, actually, there are two separate grounds under 34 and 48. One is unable to present its case, and one is public policy. According to me, simplistically, you can say that there is overlap. But if you now see the latest judgment of Justice Nariman, he seems to suggest in, if you read Vijay Karya and then Centrotrade, he seems to suggest that natural justice defense only operates till the award is given. And the defense that, for instance, that he did not consider your submissions and he went off and decided the point separately, is more of a public policy defense. So he seems to have carved out some sort of difference between 5.1b and 5.2. To simply answer your question, not from a theoretical point of view, yes, no. All natural justice points certainly do not fall within the limited scope of public policy. Even where you have a natural justice point, if it has caused no prejudice or there is no waiver, you will not succeed on the natural justice point because of the use of the word may in the section. So prejudice is also there. So there is a conflation, but ultimately it will not really have any practical effect.
Mr. George, the questions I can continue to read which we have received. If you have any questions from the other two participants or vice versa, that can be taken up, though few questions have come. It says by Shubham Saha. Post Hardy, Roger, Soshgua, BGS, SGS, Soma, etc. Where do we stand with regard to the governing law/seat? That again, it goes back to that.
So we are now arguing seat again in a domestic context in Antrix Devas also.
Actually,
so
once you are taking, once you start taking questions, you don't realize unless you. It's just like in cricket, they say that the ball is coming in 22 yards at 150 kilometer speed. You have to just adjust that. Thereafter, suddenly you realize once you are trying to settle down, then you realize that the question is again back to square one.
Back to seat.
This is to Amit. Do you think that the breaches of natural justice principles often go uncorrected by courts? No, this we have done. Yes. So this question could be answered by any of you. If a party is actually present in an arbitration hearing, as are all the other arbitrators, but the other side is present through virtual VC, can there be a legitimate concern about natural justice? Would you say that it is only human for the arbitrators to subconsciously side with the persons always present? Mr. Banerjee can say, then or Dr. Amit can add.
So there's a theoretical answer to this, and of course there is a practical answer to this. Theoretically, this has happened, and courts have said no problem. The person, I mean, as long as one party is represented through VC and one party is there, it's not an issue. There was Shashank has mentioned the US Supreme Court judgment. There are any number of US district court judgments on this. There is also an English judgment which says that VC is sufficient. That's the theory. So as long as you protect both sides, it's fine. But practically, I have seen practically one example I'll give you. And practically the reality is that it is very different when you are in person and when you are one person is on VC. And in fact, there's a guideline of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, which says the answer is very interesting. The answer they've given is interesting. If one party is on VC and one party is on person, then it is better for the other person in party in person also to be on VC. So both are on VC, then that's okay. But if you have one person sitting there and one person on VC, then practically it makes a difference. I have had the personal experience in a slightly different manner. We were doing an arbitration. There was a panel of 3 arbitrators. 2 of them were sitting in front of me. 1 of them was on VC. The reality was the 2 were consulting each other, and the 3rd person sitting on VC was really not being consulted. So practically it makes all the difference in the world. But legally, as a lawyer, I will say I can defend it in court. That would be my answer.
Excellent.
And just to add, I think on the practical side, definitely the party sitting in person will always have an advantage unless it sneezes during the hearing. So I think with the COVID, as long as you don't sneeze in the arbitration hall, you have an advantage. So I think all I would add practically is that just like when you have adjudication in courts, there are 2 schools of thought. One which says that a judge should be value neutral in terms of litigant before him or her. Whereas the other school of thought says just no, a judge is also required to identify the weaker party and therefore do what is necessary to, let's say, weigh out the balance. So therefore, I think arbitrators have to be conscious of the fact that subconsciously, psychologically, the party which is physically present is obviously going to be able to make a better impression before you for a variety of factors. And therefore, for the party on VC, I believe there must be a concerted effort by the arbitrators concerned to ensure that they are given a level playing field in terms of, say, longer time, in terms of being more patient, in terms of the question answers, etc. So yeah, as Sir said, that practically, of course, it is definitely a problem. So I would say arbitrators really need to keep that into account, even though legally they may not be such a stateable case.
This question is to Shashank, or you can add it, then we can take the question for Shashank.
I think we may have a problem where one side decides to send a video clip and the other side wants to argue. I don't think if we can equate the 2 at all.
Yeah.
So I think the takeaway is that for a tribunal, tribunal must ensure that if one party is being presented on a virtual platform, the other party, even if it is possible for it to physically make itself available, is asked to present itself on a virtual platform, just to be on the safer side.
Same level playing according to you. Shashank, while conducting virtual hearings, does the technological competence of the parties and arbitrators and potential asymmetry of technological assets have a bearing on the compliance of principles of natural justice? Though you have given certain insights, but this is a more pointed question as such.
You see, so from what I've understood from the question, I think the questionnaire...
I repeat it?
No, I've understood. What the basic essence of this question is, the one party says that it does not have the technology to present its case versus another party who and their appointed lawyers are absolutely well equipped to continue with the proceedings. So what is the difference? Will the court take this into account that one party was precluded just because it did not have the requisite technology? I think that's the essence of the question. I think practically speaking, there is always one party in an arbitration who wants to drag. Not always, but mostly. Very often respondents with no counterclaims or respondents with fudgy counterclaims will be the party who would like to drag these proceedings. And under the COVID-19 circumstances, it is the easiest to do so on account of lack of technology or being in the containment zone or not having access to files, etc. So to move forward, courts will have to and tribunals will have to see the veracity of these claims, will have to evaluate this on case-to-case basis. there cannot be a one size fits all sort of a formula. Therefore, one will have the tribunal and the courts will have to take into account when these demands are legitimate and when they are not legitimate. I'll give you an example from a very recent case law in England from the technology and construction courts. This happened during the lockdown in April itself. This was a case of Milkrist Developments versus Waters. So the respondent in this case filed an application for injunction against the claimant from proceeding with the TCC adjudication. That is the Technology and Construction Court construction claim adjudication process. It said that it was unable to present its case because the lawyer himself was under some sort of a lockdown or containment zone or a parallel of something similar to what we have in India. It also said that currently they were not trading, the offices were shut and had insufficient time to prepare as a result of the health crisis. These were some of the grounds that were taken by the councils asking for an injunction to proceed with the case. But the Technology and Construction Court held otherwise and refused to injunct and said that there was a 2-week extension that was given by the adjudicating authority, which was sufficient for the parties to equip themselves. In fact, if I can quote, the court said, adjudication by its nature requires matter to be dealt within tight time frames. And there was no reason why the lockdown would change that. Papers could have been sent electronically or transported by other means. The 2-week extension proposed by the adjudicator could have adequately dealt with any concerns over availability of witnesses and preparing the evidence. There was no reason, let alone any entitlement for the parties to be present during the site. The adjudication was therefore allowed to proceed. So this is a very recent example from April 2020 during the pandemic itself. And Indian courts will also have to look at these situations in the coming times because parties will certainly try and make a case that they were unable to present the best case on account of lack of technology or access to their files, etc.
The questions which we received on the WhatsApp and the thing, they all stand answered and we had put it across. And we have not received as such now any question on the chat box. Amongst you three, you can take up the call, or since it's over, we can call the day also. As it forward, because if we take questions, the natural justice is very narrow also subject. It's also very extensive also. As they say, it is an intensive as well as expansive. If you start expanding it, it will continue to expand. It is more like a time. They say its time is like a gas. The less space you give, it occupies that space. The more space you give, the more space it becomes. So it all depends upon this thing. Amit, what is your take ultimately? Then we will ask Shashank and Mr. Banerjee before we call up the day.
Right. So, see, I think here the only issue primarily is how to strike a balance. For instance, the Delhi High Court recently in an order where it said that when it reproduced the Supreme Court's order granting automatic extension of time for completing arbitration proceedings, it did give this normative push in the sense that it said that wherever possible, that arbitrators do hearings through video conferencing. But ultimately, the whole issue is that, we are sort of in like an unprecedented situation. And increasingly, when you have complex arbitration, when you have a 3-member tribunal, you have parties, you have witnesses sitting in diverse jurisdictions. Therefore, it is going to be very difficult in the days to come, in terms of making any sort of a straitjacket formulation. But for instance, there was a recent case before the Federal Court of Australia in a case involving the Ford Motor Company. And there, essentially, like in Shashank's example, there was an extension of time sought for a trial. So very interestingly, the court there laid out, I think, almost 7 or 8 distinct areas of controversy which might arise, say, in a virtual hearing. It talked about the ability to be able to transcribe documents, the ability to be able to cross-examine witnesses, the ability for parties to confer it with their lawyers during the stage of hearings, etc. So possibly it is a good idea for an arbitral tribunal to possibly go by that judgment or otherwise and have a checklist of the essential aspects it necessarily has to take care of during the arbitration proceedings, so that in future you can obviate any possibility of a challenge. Secondly, my suggestion would be at the end of every hearing, which a lot of arbitrators do even otherwise, record the consent or record the satisfaction of both parties as regards the procedural efficacy of the hearing that has just transpired. So that, as in the case pointed out by Mr. Banerjee, if pursuant to a receipt of such an order, demonstrating your satisfaction with the way the proceedings have gone on, you have not contested that in any manner, then the arbitral tribunal is therefore able to safeguard the sanctity of the proceedings in any future challenge proceeding. So therefore, I think the time is now to be even more paranoid, if I may use the term, in terms of the due process requirements than in earlier times. And that is something which all tribunals have to keep into account.
Mr. Shashank, then we will ask. Yes, sir. Shashank?
Amit said, I think the entire arbitration ecosystem is now almost well equipped to handle the current situation. Right from coming out of Seoul protocol and then the guidelines that Mr. Banerjee mentioned for virtual hearings of CR, then ICC, SIAC, all the institutions have come out with their circulars and the protocols that are to be followed for virtual hearings. In fact, ICSID has now made mandatory that all the filings are to be done electronically. So all the stakeholders, the institutions, the councils and the arbitrators are now finding it more and more reasonable and plausible to conduct the entire arbitration on a virtual platform. But if a party still, is under a real challenge, then that is obviously a case that will be determined on the facts and circumstances. But just for the sake of dragging a proceeding, I don't think in the present circumstances when all the stakeholders have put their energies together, and especially our Indian arbitrators who have really done some extensive hard work in, bringing their game up to the standards of international arbitrators, because I think they realize that they would otherwise perish if they are unable to hold hearings on virtual platforms and go ahead with these, commercial disputes. There is very limited scope for a natural justice defense and a challenge, which is now available. That's my perception, my view.
Mr. Banerjee.
So, so I've been hearing Dr. Amit and Shashank. Let me just conclude by saying this. The short point is that this situation is here to stay. We have to adjust to it. The entire arbitration community has to adjust to it. Mainly the arbitrators have to adjust to it. Natural justice should not be used as a weapon to undermine or delay the proceedings. In every litigation, in every arbitration, one side is in a hurry, one side wants to frustrate it. I mean, that's the reality. There is always a justice and there's always an injustice. There are always two sides. So the only caution I will say is, everybody is now willing to learn and push ahead. The only caution I will say is that you need to just make sure that you comply with section 18 and 24 and the basic principles of natural justice, and courts will be reasonable about it. And all these bogies of technical problems, imbalance, all that is where it is. As long as you can protect yourself, I would summarize it in 2 words: hasten slowly.
Point well taken, sir. I think that we had a wide spectrum of questions, and the way they were answered would definitely give an insight to the participants who already had the peeping into all these principles of natural justice and arbitration. Of course, during COVID-19, it had to be considered in a different perspective what was prior to this COVID-19 and lockdown, etc. But the insights given will definitely go in a long way for all participants, because they say that you are always a student of law. As long as you are learning, the only way is forward. eventually the difficulties come when you feel that you have learned. We had one session where Justice Singh, we said that every time you have to learn, and the way you will always move forward. The moment you realize that you know everything, the only way is that to come down, because they say that the stagnant water can never be in the purest form. Only the running water, that is the running knowledge, which gives you a peep in for everything that moves forward. So we had a wonderful session. I will ask Professor Sudipta, who have collaborated. She's representing Symbiosis Law School. Symbiosis Law School is a brand within itself. Everybody knows it. Under the aegis of the director Shashikala Gurpur, the Symbiosis Law School has reached to a different level. Before I formally ask Professor Sudipta, I will just inform that tomorrow we have a session in where Professor Shashikala Gurpur will be participating. That is on vulnerability of children in law. We have there would be a panel discussion just like today, though around 10 minutes each would be speaking. We have Justice Roshan Dalvi, Justice Shalini Joshi, Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, Professor Lakshmi Jamalkar, and Advocate Anil Malhotra on this aspect. Those who want to join us, it will be, as they say, this is not even a trailer, but the insights what we got today is a testimony of the fact that tomorrow again we will have an engaging session. Do stay connected with us. Though, as we all said, it's on virtual platform itself. So on the virtual platform tomorrow, everyone stay safe and stay blessed and healthy. On behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Symbiosis Law School, I will ask Professor Sudipta to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Chaitrit. I actually thoroughly enjoyed this webinar. I like the Q&A format. It's like a class which came prepared, and it was co-taught by 3 very interesting professors, not something that happens every day. So I really enjoyed knowing about the nitty-gritties of the whole court craft, because there's so much more to anything than just, the black letter of the law. It actually took me back to my days as a tax practitioner, where invariably all our filings before the High Court or the tribunal used to end with, and the order is against the principles of natural justice. And the kids never even bothered to update the latest case laws. It used to be the standard copy-paste paragraph. They used to scramble, who has got the natural justice paragraph ready? And we used to pull them up and say, at least, quote the right new judgments on this. So thank you so much, Dr. Amit, Shashank, Mr. Shashank, and Mr. Banerjee, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Thank you, Chaitrit, for organizing this on behalf of Symbiosis Law School, Pune, and Dr. Shashikala Gurpur. I thank you so much for collaborating with us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stay connected, right, sir?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.